Welcome to this week's episode of FFRF's Ask An Atheist. I'm Laurie Gaylor, co-president of the Freedom From Religion Foundation.
And I am Andrew Seidel, the Freedom From Religion Foundation's Director of Strategic Response. As always, if you have questions, leave them in the comments right here or email them to askanatheist@ffrf.org.
Today, we're very pleased that we're going to interview Coral Theill. She's a former member of the group called People of Praise. You may have heard about with Amy Coney Barrett. We're going to hear her story. People of Praise is the group that calls their women handmaids, and which Amy Coney Barrett and her family are longtime members of. She was basically born into this. But first, we want to get an update on the Senate confirmation. What have we learned?
So Barrett spent most of the day yesterday and today refusing to answer any substantive questions unless they came from her supporters. She, for instance, is happy to answer questions from people like, for instance, Mike Lee. She'll get into these long hypotheticals, but she won't commit to anything from anybody that's not her supporter. She wouldn't commit to recusing herself from cases involving the election, even though the person who nominated her said he's putting her there for that purpose. She wouldn't commit to recusing herself from cases where she has written publicly about the outcomes. She used the term sexual preference to describe LGBTQ people, even though that's biologically wrong and bigoted. However, it is certainly part of her religious worldview. And then most alarmingly, she said that her personal view is that life begins at conception. But she also refused to answer anything about Roe versus Wade, even though we know which way she's going to decide. She's been nominated to author the decision that strikes down Roe. So we know which way she's going to decide, but we also know that she's going to continue to dodge these questions.
So it was kind of defer, or evade. So Andrew, you came up with a very clever graphic in watching this, because at one point, what happened?
Well, so there's this moment that was orchestrated, and it was very clearly meant to be sort of a cute moment. And Senator John Cornyn asked Barrett to hold up the notes that she was referring to, and she held up this blank pad. And then Senator Cornyn made this big deal of saying, "Oh, this shows how smart you are." And yes, she's smart, but she didn't have notes because she's not giving substantive answers, not because she's smart. So it was this really cloying moment. And of course, the internet turned it on its head, because that's what the internet does. So we actually also used it to point out what is at stake. And we photoshopped Barrett's to-do list onto the pad. This is what's on her chopping block. And it's just a few of the things. Her list is very long.
So healthcare, Roe versus Wade, state-church separation, marriage equality, among them, yeah. And this has been picked up by some media outlets. They picked up the image. It was very clever.
And it's satire, but it's no joke. I mean, this is real. Everything is at stake. Roe versus Wade, racial equality, LGBTQ equality, our earth, our healthcare. I mean, our healthcare is at risk in the middle of a pandemic that has killed 220,000 Americans. They're talking about maybe 400,000 Americans by the end of the year. Certainly the separation of state and church as we know it, all of these hang in the balance now. There's very little that's not going to be on the table. The end of Roe versus Wade is going to open a new front in the war against women's rights and reproductive justice. They're going to come for birth control next. Marriage equality is at stakes. The stakes are as high as they have ever been. People should be calling their senators every day, all day.
Yes. So you came up with an image that's a joke, but it's really no joke. And here's the real issue that's so terrible, from my point of view, is that she is this quote-unquote replacement for Ruth Bader Ginsburg, whose whole career was devoted to equal justice under the law. And so, nevertheless, Amy Coney Barrett was mentioned Ruth Bader Ginsburg a lot in her in answering the questions. And what was the strategy there, Andrew?
Yeah, she was hiding behind the skirts of the woman she's trying to replace. She cited several times the Ginsburg Rule as a reason to avoid answering hard and even easy questions. And since this entire farce of a nomination is trampling RBG's legacy and work, we want to take a moment to correct this error. So here's a clip that another group put together of RBG actually giving substantive answers to substantive questions on Roe versus Wade.
Government shall not make my decisions for me. I shall make as an individual, uninhibited, uncontrolled by my government, the decisions that affect my life's course. It's her right to decide either way, her right to decide whether or not to bear a child. This is something central to a woman's life, to her dignity. It's a decision that she must make for her.
So the Ginsburg Rule, before we go on, what is that so-called Ginsburg Rule?
Well, so in the introduction to her testimony at her confirmation hearings, Ruth Bader Ginsburg said she shouldn't give substantive answers on questions that might end up coming before the court. But then that's been tortured and blown up and expanded in a way that is not faithful to what Ruth Bader Ginsburg meant or did. I mean, Barrett's refusal to say what she will do on Roe right there, we know she's going to put her religion over women's freedom, is disingenuous. You saw Ruth Bader Ginsburg answering these questions. And if you watch the Ruth Bader Ginsburg hearings, there was a lot more. She answered substantive questions on everything from gender discrimination, which she was an expert on, to affirmative action, to the limits of congressional power, and even things like the government funding for the arts she was answering questions on.
And there were questions that it was absolutely alarming to see she would not answer on. Can you tell us some of those?
Yeah, I mean, this was very disturbing. I mean, first, she refused to say that presidents should commit to a peaceful transfer of power.
President should make a commitment unequivocally and resolutely to the peaceful transfer of power.
Well, Senator, that seems to me to be pulling me in a little bit into this question of whether the president has said that he would not peacefully leave office. And so to the extent that this is a political controversy right now, as a judge, I want to stay out of it.
Do you think that the president has the power to pardon himself for any past or future crimes he may have committed against the United States of America?
That's not one that I can answer.
So she later added some waffling and maybe some better language on this point. But if you take away one moment from this hearing, I think it should be that one. It was deeply, deeply shocking. And then she even refused to answer whether intimidating voters at the polls is illegal.
Is it illegal to intimidate voters at the polls?
Senator Klobuchar, I can't characterize the facts in a hypothetical situation.
And I mean, it is very clearly illegal, as Senator Klobuchar went on to point out. This is not a hard question, and it wasn't a wandering hypothetical. It is okay to say that, yes, federal law says voter intimidation is illegal. She wouldn't do that, and it was, again, just deeply alarming to see.
And so I think we've seen that waffling. But Andrew, if we just take away one thing from this hearing, what would that be?
Oh, man. I mean, I think the most important moments was when Senator Whitehouse taught this master class on the sinister way that our courts have been corrupted by wealthy, fringe, conservative interests. It was brilliant. Now, that wealthy fringe and its shills immediately tried to portray Senator Whitehouse as this conspiracy theorist, but he brought the receipts, and I hope that everybody goes and watches this. His presentation makes it clear, really, that anyone who cares about the separation of state and church or any progressive cause needs to be in favor of court reform, correcting, and rebalancing first and foremost. Because, the best progressive plans in the world mean nothing if they can't survive a challenge in a hostile federal judiciary. So we need to really correct and rebalance the courts.
So that was Senator Whitehouse. And what about the separation of church and state and Barrett's willingness to put her holy book over the, I think, very sacrosanct secular constitution? Did that ever come up?
It did, not quite directly. There was a few moments where Senator Cornyn asked some questions on that. Most relevantly, the Santa Fe versus Doe case, which we know very well at FFRF. This said that public schools can't impose prayer on public school students.
And at football games over broadcasting, or even having the students vote on it and then do it.
Exactly. Even at things like football games, because those are still school events, and that a vote doesn't, by the students to have this prayer, doesn't give the school the right to violate the Constitution. And Barrett has written that essentially Scalia's dissent in that case was correct. And you can view that. We have a full report on Judge Barrett's alarming views on the separation of state and church. That's at ffrf.us/Barrett that people can read. So there was that moment. There was another moment where she got some questions about appearing at the group, the Alliance Defending Freedom, ADF, which is sort of the anti-FFRF. It's a hate group. It's very bigoted. They're Christian nationalists who work to weaponize religious freedom. And really, an interesting moment was, I know a lot of people have been hearing about religion, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. Her supporters regularly brought up her Christianity as a qualification for the office, and then they condemned her detractors for trying to impose a religious test for public office, even though none mentioned her religion. And we have to point out, because we know this at FFRF, and this is part of our report too, that when a judge writes and says that her personal religious beliefs should trump her oath of office, it is not a religious test to question that nominee about those statements and writing. And in fact, senators, they have a duty to do so.
Yes. Well, thank you, Andrew, for watching it, because I found it to be torture. I didn't have time to watch it during the day, but the little bits I saw, so thank you very much. And now we're going to hear from a courageous woman who is willing to expose the disgusting level of hate and vitriol, expose herself to a disgusting level of hate and vitriol, just to educate the world about people of praise, Amy Coney Barrett's religious sect. Coral Theill is going to tell us her story, but I do want to mention, Coral, that you have written a book about your experiences, correct? Bonshia, right. Making Light of the Dark. So you have had a very brutal experience with people of praise. Can you tell us your story?
Yes, we were members when I was married from 1979 to 1984 in Corvallis, Oregon. We were originally the Vine and Branches community under Father Charles Harris, who was from South Bend, Indiana, and he knew a lot of the coordinators, Kevin Ranahan and Paul and Jeannie DeSales, who often came out to Corvallis, Oregon to give us teachings, retreats, and instruction. And so our community became a part of them officially in '82, but we were under a lot of their teachings for the first few years. The abuse and crimes became more severe in 1982 through 1984. I have witnesses and affidavits from 1979 through 2020 now, and even a former member came forward and is on videotape with Stephen Hassan, a cult expert of 40 years and mental health practitioner. Dr. Paul Hesberg Sr. was my ex-husband's best friend and a member of the People of Praise, and he witnessed the People of Praise leaders abusing me. He witnessed my husband abusing me, and on tape, he is stated as saying that the People of Praise community leaders enabled my husband to be a super predator in my own home.
Wow. So I want to talk about what happened to you, but I would like to find out a little bit more about how you got involved with the People of Praise, which is a Catholic organization, by the way. So were you raised Roman Catholic? Did you marry into the People of Praise? How did that happen?
No, I was raised Lutheran, and my mother was Danish, my father German, but my mother from a Lutheran background. And in the 70s, there was a lot of Bill Gothard Institute seminars that friends and teachers in school, high school, invited me to, and it began the teaching of that authoritarian structure and headship. And the People of Praise, many of the members also agree and condone that teaching because it's very similar to theirs. When I married my husband, he demanded that I become a Catholic. I didn't have a choice in that. So after that, in '79, we joined the Vine and Branches community. I did not want to join, but because of the submission that was required in my marriage, absolute submission in all things. I was forced to go to meetings and become a part of this organization.
So the People of Praise started in South Bend, Indiana, and that's basically where Amy Coney Barrett ended up. Her family was from Louisiana, but they were part of it. So it all started there, but then you were living in Corvallis, Oregon.
Yes.
But it was taking its direction from South Bend, Indiana, correct?
Correct.
So you talked about Bill Gothard, and of course he takes the New Testament that Jesus is the head, and then man is the head of woman. So in reading through your testimony, and let's bring that up, you tried to testify before Congress, correct? In the Senate hearings, and they haven't let you do that yet.
That's correct.
So I read your testimony, and it's all about how the man is the head and the woman must submit.
Correct.
So tell us more about what that meant for you personally.
Well, in the community, I had no rights. I was told that all the decisions for me were made from my husband, who was my head. His head was Ed Brown of Corvallis, Oregon, and then Ed Brown had a head, and it went all the way up in authority, all the way back to South Bend. So I was under, I guess, correction all the time from my husband, who also, Ed Brown, would tell my husband even things I possibly needed to be corrected. And I still had a critical thinking mind in the community, and I asked a lot of questions. I did not agree, and that caused a lot of criticism of me, even calling me mentally ill. Let's see, one of the more terrible incidents was I had 2 miscarriages and DNCs back to back, mostly probably due to all the stress and abuse. But my second DNC surgery, my doctor, Dr. Charles South, who also instructed me to get safe, he told me to go home and rest, but I had to go to a community women's meeting, our People of Praise women's meetings, where every Tuesday night the men had meetings, children had meetings, and Sunday night community meetings. So I went on Tuesday night to the meeting, and all the women wanted to go on a shopping excursion, and I was still weak and bleeding from the surgery, and I said, I just can't. I need to go home and rest. I thought that was something I had a right to do, but Connie Hackenbrook, my handmaid, who was also my head, reported me. She made the call, and when I got home, there was a car running, and a man, Bruce Burning, from the community was there at our home to watch our 3 young children. I was forced in the car and taken to Ed Brown's home, sat in a chair and questioned for hours. I was shamed. I was humiliated. I was told I was poisonous and that I just couldn't cut the mustard in the walk of Jesus Christ. And I was asked what truth was, what negative was. And I just kept begging them that I could go home, but that was not allowed. So in many instances, that's illegal kidnapping and interrogation. I finally got to go home, and in the morning, my husband was called and was told by the leaders that I was to be shunned. But I could not leave, and I think a lot of people do not understand that, and this is why many cult experts do identify the People of Praise community not as a sect, but as a cult. Many of us have filled questionnaires out of all the things that was demanded of us, and it does qualify as a cult. I was not allowed to leave. I was not allowed to stay home. I was then forced at Sunday meetings to go to the meetings at St. Mary's Catholic Church, and in their meeting room, they forced me to sit on the floor in the hallway as a force of punishment and shunning. And basically, I write in my book that shunning is a cruel form of ridicule. But even Dr. Paul Hesburgh Sr.
Oh, we froze. There you go.
I remember.
We froze for a second there. Let's try again.
Okay. Yes. I was speaking about having to sit out in the hallway from meetings. That was the leader's decision to shun me and ridicule me and punish me. Many of the members saw it, including Dr. Paul Hesburgh Sr., who's testified of this and other crimes that he saw committed against me. So that was a very difficult time. My husband was very angry at me because I was not conforming, and I continued to have to be forced to go to these meetings. Those are just a few of the situations. I wasn't allowed to read books or newspapers. A friend of mine from high school had given me the book Our Bodies, Ourselves, which is an incredible book about women's rights and freedom and just human rights. And that book was destroyed. My clothing was destroyed. I wasn't allowed to see my family other than when they allowed. And the night my father died in '84, he was in the ICU unit. He was in intensive care at Vancouver, Washington, and I begged, I wanted to go see him, and I was not allowed. I wasn't allowed to speak to friends. And then the women from Vancouver, Washington were instructed to watch me in my home. They drove down from Vancouver and stayed in my home when my husband would be gone. And sometimes he'd take the children to his family farm up in Richfield, Washington. And other members, Dr. Paul Hesberg remembers that too, but I wasn't allowed to escape. I wasn't allowed to call. I wasn't allowed to leave my home. I was a prisoner. And that's how I was treated.
So before we talk about how you got out of it, I'm wondering, could we talk about this issue, this question of marital rape?
Yes. Yes.
So I'm sorry that's very hard to talk about, but I understand that that was part of your life.
I've written about it extensively. I've read incredible documents by doctors who share that the church is the worst place to go to for rape and domestic violence victims, and I found that to be true. I even tried to go to the priest at St. Mary's. He was friends with Father Charles Harris. He wouldn't listen to me. And even people in the community were shunning me. Even counselors were hostile. So there was no help. But our body was not our own. Our husbands owned us. We had no rights to contraceptives. I could not go to my doctor alone. I believe my doctor knew many things were amiss. And one time he told me, when deer are hunted, they lose their young. He said that after I had my second DNC. And I did feel like a hunted and trapped woman, but I was raped. I one time had lost my eyesight. It took many years to heal, but the doctors at the Portland KCI Institute told my husband, please don't get her pregnant. We are trying to restore her eyes. We don't know yet what to do. It's rare. And so my eyes were bandaged while I was pregnant with my fifth child. And I had no help. I was being shunned in the community and no supportive family. And then later in the years of our marriage, I was raped and beaten continually during a period I had a severe postpartum depression after my seventh birth. I hemorrhaged and had no doctor care and wasn't allowed to see my doctor, and my health just collapsed. But there was a 20-month period. I could not dress myself. I had a hard time feeding myself, and I lived with my brother for a while in Dallasport, Washington, and my husband would come there and he'd tell my brother to dress me up, and he'd pick me up at the door and take me to a motel and rape me. And I was pregnant twice during that period, and I somewhat woke up along the fifth month of my pregnancy. When I eventually did get safe, my doctor saw me at that time. He knew I'd been ill for that 20-month period, and he just told me to get the best attorney I could find and get a divorce and get safe. That was Dr. Charles South from Albany, Oregon. And the rest is history, and it's why I wrote a book. I've been in court 50 times in 24 years. I've been legally stalked by my husband even after I legally changed my name, and I'm under the Attorney General's Address Protection Program the last 20 years. And I've been threatened. I lost my 8 children, my nursing infant from Judge Norblad, but I was threatened even during the People of Praise membership that I would lose my children if I left. And I was trying to even get a divorce in '84. I was talking to my brother, but I knew I would not leave with my children, and that was too much of a psychological pain to deal with. I saw another woman in the community who lost her child to one of the male members, and so that frightened me. But I've been living with threats since I was 6 years old and continually raped by my great uncle, who was a murderer and a rapist. And I was threatened in my own home, in my family home, that I could not tell. And then in my marriage, I was threatened. In the People of Praise, I was threatened. And now I'm receiving hate mail, and there's a smear campaign. I guess the watchdog groups of Trump's and some of Fox, they're writing smear campaign articles about me, but I have a storage unit of documentation. I have 1,000 pages of court transcripts, every audio tape, videotape, affidavits from 1979 from neighbors, former witnesses of the People Praise to today. And my my book is well documented. Even District Attorney John Haroldson of Corvallis, Oregon, met with me personally. He introduced me at a speaking engagement in Corvallis, and he spoke about cults and how the most difficult cases he has are children of cult members of these far fundamentalist, legalistic Christians, and they threaten the teenagers or children who've been raped either by leaders or a father, and then eventually the children succumb to the threats and the case is dismissed. And he spoke about that, and he wrote a 5-star review for me saying that I had gone into uncharted waters, comparing our Christian patriarchy that also is practiced in our court patriarchal system. And I found the judges no different than the cult leaders or my husband. They laughed about my rapes in court. And even a woman judge, Judge Paula Brownhill from Astoria, Oregon, took the right of me to even write my children who had been beaten, who had been harmed. My husband and his pastors threatened me. I could not report the rapes of my daughters that are all documented. And now the Oregon sex offender who had raped my children or my daughters could see them anytime for years, and I have not been allowed to.
So when you left your husband, you lost your children, is that right?
Yes, I passed 6 psychological exams by the top doctors in Oregon to prove my mental wellness to the court. My ex-husband failed his, and the judge told me in the courtroom that he was leaving my young children with me. He had even allowed me to be in hiding before the court hearings in '96 because he had heard doctors' testimony, neighbors, and friends. And he was aware that I was afraid of being harmed and raped. And then 10 days later, Judge Norblad signed a court order removing my nursing baby young children from me, and I lost all 8 children. They were 6 months old to 17 years at the time, and very quickly, my children were turned against me. I did try for 2 years to see my children on court-ordered visitations. My husband and his mother would often not let me see them. I didn't have monies for further court ordeals. And then one time I was sexually assaulted on the property when I tried to pick up the children, and I found my children were being abused because they loved me and they wanted to be with me, but they were turned against me and brainwashed by even my ex-husband's family. And the church leaders, my children went to San Am Christian School in Corvallis, Oregon, who were also hostile to me. And my final statement is I believe that the Christian church is in the dark ages when it comes to domestic violence and rape and childhood abuse and rape. And often they will hide it as a family and church secret. They will threaten mothers, which they did me. And they threatened to put me in a mental hospital if I reported. So I called my court reporter friend in '95 in October, and I said, I need help. I need you to come here and help me watch the children so I can get to an attorney. And yeah, I'm the one who did the legal thing that we are supposed to do. Police, teachers, parents, pastors, priests are supposed to report rape. And I'd always told my children to come to me. But when I did, I lost everything. And I ended up living out of my car and sued for twice that I earned to pay my wealthy abuser. So my life continued from 6 years old till now. And I'm very thankful to be alive. I'm thankful for the right to just believe as I want. And I love studying about quantum physics, and I just am thankful I have freedom of mind now, but I was abused for even asking questions and not conforming. And the People of Praise community is a dangerous community. They've known about my book and story for 17 years, and now they're very disturbed about it. But there's documentation in the book, and I have given all the reporters documentation.
And your book came out when?
17 years ago.
Oh, 17 years ago. Okay, well, very timely today. And you did change your name for safety, correct?
Yes. Yes.
So
it did not. I was in court most of the time since then, so I wasn't able to go live in safety with a new name. I was in court most all these last 24 years. I have not had a life. Also, Bonshia, Making Light of the Dark, has been used as a college text at Linfield College in Portland, Oregon for nursing students studying about domestic violence, trauma recovery, rape, child abuse. I've been a writer for Leatherneck Magazine, and I've written articles on PTS, TBI, suicide prevention, and wounded warriors, and the Montford Point Marines. And my story about marital rape was published in New York just 2 years ago, in the book called Reclamation, a Survivor's Anthology. And they used the transcripts and quoted the judge laughing about my rapes with my rapist. my husband, and all our names are in it, and nobody has ever sued me. In 17 years, nobody has sued New York for that book, and that book in New York raises money for rape victims.
So you would say that the People of Praise cult, as you call it, is the perfect place for a predator, a male predator, to hide, to be free to prey.
Yes.
Prey.
The predators are mostly malignant narcissists, and I believe that many of the leaders are just void of compassion. And I've shared on many shows that it is cruelty at its highest form, and yet they are not under any kind of supervision. Other groups, I've been receiving numerous emails from former members. You can go to my website and look under the Senate letter at Women's Coalition International. There's comments after comments and other people who were also abused in People of Praise. But that is what they do. They abuse. And I was going to share, there's a priest that also investigated other groups like People of Praise, and they were shut down. They were investigated financially and also for abuse, but somehow People of Praise has been protected. Even though my book's been out for 17 years, it documents crimes and abuse. And I do not understand why Oregon has been silent about this. Our senators know about it. I met with Senator Merkley per his assistance request in 2014. Mr. Joel Corcoran, who had been an attorney for battered women, had read my website, articles, heard my book, and he called me and recommended I write a document of all 20 years of the court abuse I'd experienced so they could use my book and story to help possibly improve state and federal laws. He recommended I meet with Senator Merkley, which I did in D.C., and I never heard back. I never heard back from Senator Merkley. I called a couple years later, asking, and he said, you should be thankful we answer your phone call. I did hear from Jessica, Senator Merkley's assistant, this past week because I left messages about my Senate letter. She said there's nothing that can be done, that Senator Lindsey Graham said there'll be no testimony.
Yeah, that would be a very hard nut to crack to get Graham to let you testify. So I just have one final quick question. Did you ever have any experience with Notre Dame and People of Praise?
Pardon me?
With Notre Dame, with the Catholic College and People of Praise. There seems to be quite a connection there. Did you have any experience with that or know of it?
Father Charles Harris was from Notre Dame. He was a chaplain at Oregon State University. That's where he indoctrinated young students into being baptized in the Holy Spirit, speaking in tongues, miracles, exorcism, prophecy, and that's when they believed to start the Vine and Branches community in Coral Theill, Oregon. And so that's how we began. And then Jeannie and Paul DeSalles from South Bend came out often. I was at Jeannie DeSalles' retreat, forced retreat. I was there, but the women weren't allowed to speak or talk to me. But Jeannie DeSalles said we must submit to our husbands in all things with joy. And I attended Paul DeSalles from South Bend. He was the co-founding leader. I attended his teachings. And he said that the commitment and loyalty vowed to the People of Praise community is the utmost highest commitment. It's even above all relationships, even your marriage. So people that are very indoctrinated in this, they believe they're going to lose their soul if they leave. It's almost like a gun is to their head, a psychological gun. So I did have, and then there was Bud and Sharon Rose who lived in Coral Theill, Oregon with our tithe money. We tithed, and all the community's money went to leaders, but they lived here in a big house in Coral Theill, Oregon to, I guess, disciple us. And I was at their home. They were at my home. And even though they all called me mentally ill because I asked questions, I was left alone with their young 5-year-old daughter every week with no supervision. So they used me, but they shamed me. And that was Bud and Sharon Rose. I knew them for the year they were here.
So, Coral, are you willing to take questions if there are any for you?
Yes, that'd be fine.
Okay, and then we still have Andrew here to take questions.
There are a ton of questions. You're also getting a ton of empathy and sympathy. People are thanking you for sharing their story. And Lisa's saying, I'm so sorry you endured this abuse. And not just from people watching, but also I'm getting text messages and messages from staff who are watching this, FFRF staff who are crying and just very thankful that you have the courage to stand up and say these things. So thank you. We are getting a lot of questions. One person is asking if you can talk a little bit more about the people of praise and whether or not they hear and talk directly to gods or talk for gods, and that specific aspect of it.
Well, most of them, 99.9% of them, are Catholic. And then they believe they're the remnant now in the people of praise community, that they have the only truth and they speak in tongues. So they're favored of God, favored of Jesus. So that is their belief. Their actions do not match a belief.
And we're also getting questions about the different moral codes and the different treatment for men and women in people of praise. Quite a few people are asking if you can elaborate more on the specific rules that apply to women versus the specific rules that apply to men in the group.
Yes, the women, the group is basically like patriarchy. Any church that is deeply embedded in patriarchy, the only reason it's there is for the subjugation of women, period, full stop. So the men, they can leave. If they want to leave the community, they can leave. I know men that have left and they're still friends with the community. There was no problem of them leaving. I was married and I was under the full submission of my husband. There was one show I was on, Inside Edition, and she kept asking me 3 times, why couldn't you just stay home? It's very hard for people who've not been in a cult or extreme group like this to understand. But I said, well, the or else was extremely frightening. You learn. You don't have to be beaten every day. You learn if you step outside of their absolute direction and what they've ordered you to do, that is going to be pretty severe. So you get in that car when they tell you to get in the car. You're forced to do a lot of things you don't want. You're forced to be raped when you're asking for your health to recover. You don't have any rights. I couldn't see a doctor alone. But the men, many of the single men, all of the single men are under headship too. Many of them live with a married couple. The single women are under a handmaid, and they live with a married couple. And so we're all under headship. For women like me, I had no rights at all. None.
I just have a follow-up about that use of that term handmaid.
Yes.
Because that seems to have been sort of expunged from websites after The Handmaid's Tale. Was that a common word? Were you a handmaid, or were you answering to handmaids?
Yes, we were called handmaids, and I've been following their websites for years. I've been researching them for years. I follow up with people who have left the cult, and I know many of the children that were in it that have left. Some are doing okay, some are not. But handmaid was what we were called. Coney Hackenbrook at Corvallis was my assigned head. We were in groups of 6 or 7 women each. So I had to listen to her too. She would organize us to do this or that, and I had to obey her. I could not question that. So I do know they scrubbed that name after the Handmaid series came out, but I will share, a lot of people have read my book throughout the years. They asked me if I'd seen the Handmaid series, and I said, not yet. I'll need to brace myself because it's probably going to be very triggering, which it was, although I love the 3rd part, which was about the resistance, and that's who I am. I'm a seasoned resistance fighter. But the beginnings, I told my friends, it's very traumatic, but should be traumatic for everyone, but that's how I lived. And I always knew what was going to happen in the next week. I could tell my friends, I could have written that script. I already know what's going to happen. That woman's going to be on a bridge. She's going to be wanting to kill herself after they took her baby, and they're going to disfigure her, harm her, beat her, and they're going to use another handmaid to get her down off the bridge because they need her to nurse the baby. So that's... I understood many of the components of The Handmaid's Tale. If people have not lived this life, you understand the underbelly of it, and you understand what patriarchy is about the subjugation of women. That's all.
And we do know that the People of Praise magazine did refer to Amy Coney Barrett's mom specifically as a handmaid in one of the now deleted versions. Right. There's a follow-up question for that from Alida, who's one of FFRF's chapter leaders, asking how would Barrett's relationship with her husband relate to this hierarchy in the group? Does he have authority over her, and would that apply in her, for instance, in her job?
Yes. that's just an automatic yes. If you're in the People of Praise community, you are under absolute submission of your husband. Now, I believe the People of Praise community, like the Jim Jones community, it's not very much different. Jim Jones knew many politicians. He was respected. And yet the underbelly of his community, it was about 900. Some souls were dead eventually. So it's all the same. I feel her husband may have wanted her to have power in society, so People of Praise would have influence over us now, all us citizens. It's scary. People have been reading my story, reporters even, everybody is scared. There's a review at my book at Amazon, and she said, I'm sorry, I'm going to just say I found this book because I Googled Coney Barrett, and it came to this book, and I read it, and this was a horrific story of abuse, and I am alarmed. And so people should be, but she is under her husband's under another head, who's under another head, and it goes all the way to the top with no accountability. And I feel she will woman. And when I was in the community, they were anti-gay. There was a young son, an incredible man, who the men spoke vile things about him. And he left, went to college. He's a doctor now and married. But I just worry for every human being. The community is based on anti-abortion, anti-woman, the subjugation of women.
Coral, we did get a couple questions about that people are assuming they know the stance on LGBTQ issues, but there are a lot of people who would like you to elaborate on those stances from the People of Praise, if you can.
Well, even on their website, and even Amy Coney Barrett, this is her belief. It's part of the People of Praise doctrine. They all take a vow. They marry one another, but they believe that marriage is only between a man and a woman, husband and wife. That's all.
We have another question from Anne, who is wondering if the People of Praise clergy or their lay clergy or their leaders ever participate in events that instruct members on how to vote or how to advocate for pro-life political candidates or anti-LGBTQ candidates, etc.
So politically, when I was a member, I know my husband became involved as a chairman of the Portland, Oregon Right to Life, even though he was my rapist. I had no rights to contraceptives. I almost died at birth. He was their chairman. And after he left or was forced to leave the People of Praise community, he was at every Capitol steps, anti-abortion rally. He'd line me and the kids up, and he was very involved. And he would go to the fairgrounds at all the community county fairs and have booths. I do know that some of the leaders are deacons in the church. I believe Kevin Ranahan, the original leader of the South Bend People of Praise, is a deacon. They're very involved often in the church, and the church seems to approve them and have a fine relationship. But I've never found help in the Catholic Church, even when I was being abused. So maybe that's just business as usual for them. And I do believe the Pope and I believe the Catholic Church needs to investigate this organization. And I would start with the financials. They took the deed to our home. And I do know that they know your paychecks. They know you're expected to tithe to them. And I've heard of members who saw some of the financial reports, the former members, and they said the paycheck for the coordinators and the heads is obscene. And it's all from us members. So it's somewhat like a pyramid group. I think they should start with financials, and I believe they should investigate crimes. I'm getting letters, emails from all former members who have also had crimes committed against them. I'll also add, this is not on the political side, but before I forget, Father Charles Harris was a, exorcist for the Catholic Church, and he used that often in Corvallis, Oregon. I was exorcised for demons often until I left my ex-husband. Anytime that I would question anything, I had to obey. I would just be told I was demon-possessed, as Jezebel spirit. I had not learned how to submit to my husband. I was working 20-hour days, eventually had 8 children, homeschooling, no outside contact. But Father Charles Harris exorcised me for demons. I was then put in special counseling with him, which was to shame and humiliate me and berate me. And so that went on weekly for years, every Saturday. And another example you need to all know is one girl, one family had many children. They eventually left, and the father's letter is in my book also about what he experienced. But their daughter had anorexia. Their children were all fine until they joined this community. But the children are under pretty strict rules too. And you're supposed to just be marrying within the community and socializing within the community. So their social life is very strictly changed. She became severely anorexic, just a lovely young teenager, and she ended up in the Oregon State Mental Hospital and almost died. She was there for a long time, but Father Harris went there and exorcised her for demons and talked to her about her sin problem. So there's ritual and spiritual abuse, and I find this mental and emotional abuse.
So, Coral, we're getting we have one more question for you, and then one more question that everybody's asking that I'm going to field. So, the last question for you is: people are really kind of blown away that you're not going to be able to testify at this Supreme Court nomination hearing. So, if people want to read your testimony,
Yes.
and see, where can they find that?
It's at my website, which is still up. All my social media feeds have been blocked for the last few days. I can't even get into them. I've been posting about People of Praise for many, many years, but you can get to my website at www.coranikathill.com. Information about the Senate letter is at the heading, and you can read the link at the Women's Coalition International, but just click on the link there. There's a picture of me with Amy Barrett asking Coral to testify, but Senator Graham says no, and I have called all of the Judiciary Committee senators, left message with their aides. I've tried to email the letter to them. I've contacted my senators in Oregon. They don't seem to feel they can do anything, but they've known about my story for 17 years. I've emailed them and called them for years. Nobody's been interested about the crimes that were committed against me. But you can still call all the senators. But one thing I'd like to share, it was Senator Ben Sasse who was, tutoring us about civics classes. And it was Senator Joni Ernst that talked about religion and faith, that we should respect that. I will say, please stop. Please stop. This is not about religion and faith. Jim Jones hid under religion and faith, and 900 some souls died. And I'm going to share that you can share that this has qualified as a cult. Stephen Hassan of www.freedomofmind.com. You can go there, and a lot of our testimony is up on video now. He interviewed me after the AP for an hour. My video's there with others, and he's doing a full study on this, and many former members are going to him. But do please call your senator today, email them, email the Washington Post. I just talked to Washington Post this morning, but this needs to be live. They need to read this letter, but they're calling this religion and faith. No, I honor everybody's faith and religion. This is about crimes. It's about abuse. It's about a community that has no what do you call it? There's no supervision. There's no oversight. And I believe they need investigated.
Well, and I would like to reiterate that. And Dr. Hassan is at Harvard, I believe. And that you just brought up kind of one of the questions that everybody is asking, what can we do? Not just about your story, but also about the fact that Amy Coney Barrett wants to be a Supreme Court justice for life. What can we do to stop this? And Coral already hit the answer. It is call your senators. Call the U.S. Capitol switchboard at 202-224-3121. That's 202-224-3121. They seem united now in favor of Barrett, but we do not know what is going to happen. Anything can happen. A lot of senators are sick. So much could change, but it's only going to change if we fight. If we don't fight, nothing will change. So you have to pick up the phone. You have to make that call. I do think we can do this.
And may I add one more thing? May I add one more
Sure.
sentence? I believe the founding fathers, even though everything at the beginning was, we've changed, we've evolved as a nation, and I believe they believed that we would evolve as a nation. When she becomes a Supreme Court justice, we will go back. Some women think 50 years, I say 100, and everybody's rights is at stake. And I believe in freedom. I believe in equality. I believe in justice. And my words, a lot of people think I'm attacking her. No, I look at her as a fellow human being. I can pray for everybody's highest good or hope for everybody's highest good, but I believe in justice. And I believe in not in defeating people, but I am for justice. These are things I'm for, and I'm for the Americans, all Americans, and people who think this is going to go well. They need to read my book.
Well, Coral Theill, thank you so much for spending time with us today, telling us this very disturbing story about People of Praise, the sect or cult that Amy Coney Barrett is deeply immersed in, the person that we're looking at to add to a lifetime appointment to the U.S. Supreme Court. It's very brave of you to speak out. Congress needs to do something about your letter. Thank you again for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure being here.
And thank you, Andrew. And that's Ask an Atheist for this week. Thank you for joining us. And if you want more information about Amy Coney Barrett, go to our news link at ffrf.org. You need to contact your senators to ask for the confirmation hearing to be delayed, that vote to be delayed, and join us next week at the same time, same place for Ask an Atheist.